and welcome to the October 16th meeting of the Kiwanis Club of Birmingham. Please stand as I invite John Burton to the podium to offer the invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good afternoon. Let's bow our heads, please. Mighty God, as this club gathers in this election season, we ask for your blessing on our nation, state, and community, as well as on our leaders as we make decisions that affect all of our lives and those of our children. We thank you for the opportunity afforded in this country, which we often take for granted, to hear differing views and for each to vote according to his or her respective conscience. And we pray that at the end of the day, we have the ability to work with each other, even when there's honest disagreement over the correct path to take. Give us the wisdom to parse through the issues and challenges of our time, to work together for justice and righteousness, and to do what pleases you here on this earth. Amen. Please join me in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, John. Well, it's good to have our club secretary, J.W. Carter, back with us after his brief foray into the world of television. J.W., welcome back, and why don't you come on up for some announcements and welcome our guests.
Great. So I'm sure you all missed me after 1 week off. Anytime you can start a new gig and immediately miss the second one, you want to do it. That's just some free professional advice from me to you. As you know, as Scott mentioned, I had some television responsibilities last week. The most important thing, I think, as you become more famous is not to forget, no eye contact, is not to forget where you came from, and to make sure you treat people with the same level of respect as you treated them before. And so I pledge to do that, okay, from this forward on. So I asked for feedback during my first week, and I think we have a slide up with some of the feedback. So thank you guys very much for this. This was extraordinarily helpful. I will say it is okay to send positive comments every once in a while. And I do want to say, like, listen, my first week, obviously I got crossways with Jim Knowles, and I thought he was going to be here, and he wasn't. And so I did want to just take a second to apologize to him. So Jim, do you mind standing up? Okay, so, well, you know, at some point we should all apologize to Jim Knowles, even though he, after his year up here, he probably owes each of us a personal apology. I am still looking and waiting for anyone who's got an event coming up. Maybe you're working with a nonprofit, something charitable that you want to promote. If you want to send something to me and you want me to highlight it, I'm happy to do it. But you got to send it to me, or send it to Gail, or send it to Scott, or just send it to someone. And then eventually that will get to me. It's a pretty small town. But that's it for me. I want to make sure that we save plenty of time for our speaker and the introduction. But now I want to make sure that our guests feel welcome. So I believe, Mr. Hartline, you have a guest.
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce my guest, Will Weichel, to his wife is Emily, and she's a new member, so she's getting off to a great start. He's a director, investment manager at Highland Capital, a graduate of Wake Forest, I believe, undergrad, and Georgia grad school. So I don't know if you pull for Georgia, but I'm sure you're still licking your wounds from last weekend's LSU victory. But thanks for joining us.
Don't worry, you have that Wake Forest football to fall back on. Linda, you have a guest.
I'm pleased to have my guest, my wife, Dr. Susan Lawrence.
Welcome. And Nick Dinella has a guest.
Thank you, JW. Pleased to welcome Anna Manasco, who's a friend and colleague at Bradley Avery.
Terrific. Let's give a warm welcome to all of our guests. Back to Scott.
Thanks, J.W., and welcome to all our guests. It's good to see you back after your brief foray and stardom has had no effect on you. Thank you. Okay, as y'all know, new members are key to a thriving and dynamic club. And happy today, we've got a new member introduction. Whitney Wright's going to come up here and introduce Emily Buckle.
I'm privileged today to introduce my friend and the newest member of the club to you. When Emily and I first met about 6 years ago, we immediately connected over two things that are foreign to most Alabamians. The first I'm a little embarrassed to admit is Jim's Philadelphia cheesesteaks. A place she and I both patronized frequently past midnight when we were young enough to stay up that late. And the second is the NHL. Per usual in Alabama, using the term NHL results in a lot of blank faces staring back, so I'll explain. That's an acronym for National Hockey League. The NHL, because Emily and I, well, we both love a good fight, but also it was a hockey player who said something that we both quoted to each other numerous times, and it's a quote I think that has guided our mantra as two outsiders working to set up careers in this town. The quote comes from Wayne Gretzky, and he's the first guy that said, "You miss 100% of the shots that you never take." Emily and I have spoken numerous times about how we appreciate the generosity of this city and this business community to give people who are motivated, people who are thoughtful, people who are smart, people like Emily, an opportunity to take their ideas and initiatives and run. And I think that Birmingham, now more than ever, should make Wayne Gretzky feel welcome, as it truly gives people like Emily the opportunity to take shots, and that's really what she's done since she's moved here. Before I tell you about her work locally, I'll give you some quick highlights from her impressive resume. Academically, she's completed programs at the University of Georgia, Davidson College, Oxford University, Columbia University, and UNC at Chapel Hill. She's developed and executed strategies for world-class organizations, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and also the Aspen Institute. Her extensive experience in leadership development, succession planning, and community engagement shine bright as she led organizational development at UAB for over 7 years. We're fortunate now to have her in the office of the president at UAB, where she works directly with Dr. Ray Watts in leading projects and initiatives related to community and economic development. In the short 5 months Emily's been in her new position, she's taken a lot of shots. She's launched 6 new projects and has 11 in the pipeline, including a grant that's being announced today that's going to provide funding for low-income parents to access quality childcare while they work towards earning a degree at UAB. Emily's a deacon at Independent Presbyterian Church, and she shares her time with organizations like Alabama Possible, Habitat for Humanity, and also First Light. She and her husband Will live in Mountain Brook with their 2 daughters, Emily and Susie. I know your career and professional experiences will provide valuable perspective to our club and our membership. And what I love most about you is your ability to truly inspire service in others. You continue to set an example, I know for me, through both your action and your rhetoric, of deep dedication to the kind of service projects that grow a community and also benefit its most valuable populations. So please help me in welcoming Emily to the club.
Emily, welcome to the club. We hope you'll join the greeting group out front at the badge station and greet members in the next few weeks so they can get to know you and you can get to know them. So welcome, glad you're here. All right, now on to the introduction of our head table. Roger Hartline. Roger is the current member of our board of directors. Roger, please stand. Managing shareholder Hartline Financial Advisors, Kiwanis since 2016. Whitney Wright, just introduced Emily, Director of Investor Relations, Cook and Bynum Capital Management, Kiwanis since March of 2018. Emily Weichel, who you just heard introduced, just by Whitney. And next, J.W. Carpenter, our current Distinguished Secretary, Executive Director of the Birmingham Education Foundation in Kiwanis since 2013. John Burton, thank you for that thoughtful invitation. Is a current member of our Board of Directors, attorney shareholder Maynard Cooper Gale, and Kiwanis since 2008. And finally, Matt Lemke, distinguished past president of our club, attorney partner Bradley Abraham Holt Cummings, Kiwanis since 1998. Matt has the honor of introducing our speakers. Please join me in recognizing the head table.
Thank you, President Scott. In 1978, a young Alabamian was ready to come home, having earned an Ivy League degree with honors from Dartmouth College. having earned a law degree at Vanderbilt and having been the first foreign student to study at Brazil's most prestigious law school. Tom Parker's resume no doubt would have landed him a job at just about any leading law firm in the state or region. But even then, he had a passion for public service and public policy. So he launched a career dedicated to those two interests. He began as an assistant attorney general of Alabama, and along the way, he held jobs including as executive director of what is now the Alabama Policy Institute and as general counsel for the Alabama court system. 14 years ago, the people of Alabama elected him to be a justice on our Alabama Supreme Court. And there he has developed a reputation not as a plaintiff's judge, not as a defendant's judge, but as a judge who applies the law as written to the cases before him. Now he seeks to continue his career of public service with a term as Chief Justice of Alabama, a post to which he's been nominated by the Republican Party. Please join me in welcoming a devoted public servant and my friend, Justice Tom Parker.
Oh, thank you for that, Matt. As Matt told you, I am a strict constructionist. But more than that, I'm what you call an originalist. I want to find the original intent of our founding fathers before trying to determine what was meant by the words of the Constitution, the Declaration, or even the early statutes that were passed in our country. I am so devoted to that when I was first elected in 2004, I went to Washington, D.C. and was sworn in by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. I wanted to come under that line of faithful constitutional interpretation. And my pursuit of that has led me to an unusual habit or collecting. I have started collecting original documents from the founding era. And I want to talk to you today about something that I hope will not be dry, law at the founding. But I hope that we can make this interesting by taking a look at Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. Now, I'm going to talk to you about this historic set that I have on display here. I bought this first edition set at auction in New York City when the New York City Bar Association auctioned off their collection. And as you can see, their imprint is on the side. The very first volume is 1766. Now let's get into why Blackstone is important. Research shows that Blackstone was the second most cited thinker in American politics from 1760 to 1805, right behind Montesquieu. And this is a little surprising that we have somebody writing about law being considered a political thinker. The head of the Library of Congress, Daniel Borstein, gave us this second quote. In the history of American institutions, no other book except the Bible has played so great a role. Throughout the latter half of the 1700s and the first half of the 1800s, Blackstone's popularity in America was uneclipsed. It is said that more copies of Blackstone's commentaries were sold in America than in England. And that was Sir Edmund Burke saying that on the floor of Parliament. And then we go to the University of Chicago Press, where they said Sir William Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England is the most important legal treatise ever written in the English language. So let's see what kind of impact that had on the founding of America. Here is Samuel Adams quoting Blackstone in 1769 in the Gazette there in Boston, using it as justification for the Revolution. Now this is only 4 years after the publication of the first volume. They were published in sequence year after year. At the English Revolution, the British Constitution was again restored to its original principles declared in the Bill of Rights, which was afterwards passed into a law and stands as a bulwark to the natural rights of subjects. quote, "To vindicate these rights," says Mr. Blackstone, "when actually violated or attacked, the subjects of England are entitled first to the regular administration and free course of justice in the courts of law, next to the right of petitioning the King and Parliament for redress of grievances, and lastly, to the right of having and using arms for self-preservation and defense. These, he, Blackstone, calls auxiliary subordinate rights, which serve principally as barriers to protect and maintain the three great and primary rights of personal property, personal liberty, and private property." And focus on this next sentence. "And that of having arms for their defense," he tells us, "is a public allowance under due restrictions of the natural right of resistance and self-preservation, when the sanctions of society and laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression." Our founding fathers were influenced by Blackstone, but they did make modifications to meet the needs of this new continent. And this is definitely one of those areas where our Second Amendment does not have these restrictions that were applicable in England at that time. Now, in 1924, the American Bar Association gave a statue of Blackstone to the Bar Association in London. U.S. Attorney General George Wickersham made the speech presenting it. And this is what he said: "The philosophy of the Declaration of Independence usually is ascribed to Locke and Paine. But it appears to me that one may clearly trace the influence of Blackstone's commentaries on the mind of Jefferson in the affirmations of the Declaration that all men are born with certain inalienable rights. The counts in the indictments of George III contained in the Declaration of Independence in the main are sustained by Blackstone's descriptions of the rights of Englishmen and the principles of the British Constitution." But then he went on to say, "But if the commentaries furnish Jefferson and the other signers of the Declaration of Independence with suggestion and authority for the principles they asserted, they also furnished invaluable suggestion to the framers of the Constitution of the United States. The legal conception and institutions of the Constitution reflect the teaching of the commentaries. The common law, as Blackstone set it forth, became the fundamental law of America." Now, there's a picture of the statue that they gifted to the Bar Association in London. And this writer, I think, ties it in very just succinctly. As Attorney General Wickersham indicates, Blackstone's influence extended from the nation's philosophical foundation in the Declaration of Independence to its institutional foundation in the Constitution and to its common law, legal foundation. Blackstone's intellectual and practical impact on American political philosophy, governing institutions, and legal systems being more profound than it was even in England, Blackstone's commentaries may be justly counted among the foundational canon of America. So that's why I am interested in Blackstone. It's something that I have to confess, we did not study at Vanderbilt Law School. And I'm sorry that we didn't, because this is where America started. This is what I am studying to help me in my constitutional interpretation. Now, let me give you a few examples of how the Declaration of Independence was based on Blackstone. Let's look at the first one, the quartering of troops. The charge against King George III in the Declaration is in the next column. The King has given his assent for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. Blackstone. The Petition of Rights enacts that no soldier shall be quartered on the subject without his own consent. So that's the inspiration for one of those charges against King George. I think there are like 28 or 29 charges. Here's another one, trial by jury. The King has given his assent for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. That's the charge. Blackstone said, the trial by jury is that trial by the peers of every Englishman, which, as the grand bulwark of his liberties, is secured to him by the Great Charter. What's the Great Charter? The Magna Carta. Our law has wisely placed this strong barrier between the liberties of the people and the prerogatives of the crown. Right to petition. We heard Samuel Adams referring to this as the second avenue of relief. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injuries. Blackstone. There still remains that right appertaining to every individual, namely the right of petitioning the king or either house of parliament for the redress of grievances. Let's go to taxation, the one we always hear about with the revolution. The charge. The king has given his assent for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Blackstone. No subject of England can be constrained to pay any age or taxes, even for the defense of the realm or the support of government, but such as are imposed with his own consent. Now keep this quote in mind because we're going to revisit it as we move forward. And let's do this last one. The king's protection of his subjects. The charge in the Declaration of Independence against King George III was, the king has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. It is a maxim of law that protection and subjection are reciprocal. Now, there were 1,400 copies of Blackstone's printed in Philadelphia in 1771. There were no copyright laws at this time, so this, you can't even say it was a pirated copy. It was just free for all at this time. And Bell didn't think it would sell, so he had people subscribe to it in advance. And we have that list of subscribers today and know who they were. There were 831 individuals who bought these 1,400 copies, and plus there were booksellers. And 16 of the subscribers became signatories of the Declaration of Independence. 6 were delegates to the 1787 Constitutional Convention. 1 was elected President of the United States, and another became Chief Justice of the United States. That's because John Marshall's father was a subscriber and bought that, intending that his son would study it. Now, there were nearly 2,500 copies here in America at the time, including the ones that had been published here by Bell in Philadelphia. And these commentaries clarified what the colonists were fighting for. They provided a common language for it. And I love this quote: no writer in law ever has for so long a time enjoyed such supremacy as he, and no other exerted such an influence over a nation in its hour of birth and during the years of its growth to full maturity and statehood. So you can see why I'm attracted to Blackstone. It is a foundational canon of America. Now, this, by the way, is just a copy of the list of the subscribers. And look at that first name alphabetically, John Adams. Let me just move forward over a few things to save some time later. Oh, this is an interesting set that I acquired. It's my most recent set. It's a 1783 set because the owner of this, John Lansing Jr., 4 years later, was one of the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention. And for those book collectors here, I had this rebound in Anniston. The best historical rebinder in America is in Anniston, Alabama. And all the major collectors send their books to him to rework them. So let's look at this 1766 set that I purchased. They just advertised it as a first edition. They said nothing about the historical value of it. And when I opened this, I was just shocked to see this bookplate. M.V. Buren, the 8th President of the United States, was the last owner of this set of books that is before you. But that is not the most exciting thing in there to me. More exciting than that to me is this. the signature of the first owner on the first page of the book. E.R. Wegg. Doesn't mean anything to us, but it's such an unusual name that it's easy to research. This was Edmund Rush Wegg, who was the Attorney General of British West Florida. With the internet now, I actually have been able to acquire a copy of his marriage certificate where it was filled out Edmund Rush Wegg, but he signed it E.R. Wegg, exactly like he did this set of books. He was the Attorney General for British West Florida and a judge of the Court of Admiralty. Now, studying Alabama history in Alabama public schools, I have to confess that I knew nothing about British West Florida. I knew we had the British flag among the array of flags in Mobile and over Alabama, but I didn't know anything about British West Florida. This was created in 1763 with the peace treaty that ended the French and Indian War. Spain had joined France and was on the losing side. England, as the victor, took Florida away from Spain and divided it between East Florida and West Florida. And so here's an overlay of British West Florida with Alabama today. You can see that it went up above Montgomery, actually included Fort Toulouse right below Wetumpka. And so 1/3 of Alabama geographically was in British West Florida. When we look back at the 1783 date, that's the Peace Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War. And Spain had again joined France. This time they were on the victorious side, and so they got Florida back from England at that time. Now, there's not much written about a character like Wegg, but here I found this in a book in 2015. West Florida's Attorney General Edmund Rush Wegg claimed that Parliament had no right to levy taxes. This is what I quoted earlier from Blackstone as the source of one of the charges against King George. He was quoting Blackstone himself, that Parliament had no right to levy taxes on the colonies without their consent, charging that no man can be bound to any government unless his own consent is conveyed either by himself or representative. So here's the Attorney General of British West Florida, a British citizen who knows his rights as a British citizen, who is actually chastising Parliament for passing an unconstitutional law. Now, let's zero in on Mobile Bay. And I want to take us down to Baldwin County, to this area. You see Point Clear there. And let's explore Wegg a little. Here is a book on colonial Mobile that says, Governor Dunsford recommended to the home government that a substitute for Mobile be built on the cliffs. They were having disease problems in Mobile, and we're talking about moving to the higher land on the eastern shore. It was between his land on one side and Mr. Wegg's land on the other side. And it's on the bluffs right below Montrose. That's a geographic name we still know today. Here is a 1766 map from the British Admiralty. And if you look at this, you can see right above Point Clear is Wegg's property. Here is another book on historic Mobile that says, Attorney General Edmund Rush Wegg had a home on Mobile Bay near Battles Wharf. That's why this is the most exciting signature in the book to me. In 1766, this set of books originated in Alabama and introduced the common law into our state. Now, Wegg went on to be the Speaker of the House of British West Florida, and in that capacity, he received a letter from the Continental Congress urging British West Florida to join the other colonies in the Revolutionary War. He was a British-born native citizen who refused to do that, and he paid the price. Because in 1783, when Spain retook Florida, he had to join the community of British exiles that was forming in the Bahamas. but he became Attorney General in the Bahamas. And Duvall, in her 2015 book, writes, Edmund Rush Webb became Attorney General of the Bahamas despite his leadership of the Stamp Act protest. Now, here's the bookplate of the second owner, another unusual name, so that you can research it historically. William Willie. He studied law in London at the Inns of Court and returned to Georgia and was licensed in 1780. Based on his British experience, he was a loyalist, joined the forces fighting against the colonialists, and he actually became a captain in the King's Rangers, leading some of the fighting in and around Savannah, Georgia. He was subsequently indicted for treason by the Georgia legislature. I have a copy of that indictment. He fled to New Brunswick, where the first wave of people leaving America were, those who left Boston to New Brunswick. But then he moved to Bahamas and became the Solicitor General for Whig. So we can see how the books would have changed hands. He went on to be Chief Justice of the Bahamas, and he was moved around as Chief Justice of several of the other islands in the Bahamas. Now, what the interesting backstory on this is that his family were members of Christ Church in Savannah, Georgia, founded by John Wesley. During his childhood, George Whitefield was his pastor until at age, when Willie was age 11, Whitefield left to evangelize America and was the spark for the first Great Awakening that preceded the Revolutionary War. I have correspondence. Well, let me back up a little. The seeds planted in his early life took root when Willie arrived in the Bahamas. And when we're dealing with characters like this that are not major people that biographies are written about, we just find bits and pieces. And one of these lines was scandalous. He became a Methodist. And he outraised the other slave owners there because he was so humane to the slaves. He would even invite the Methodist ministers out to preach to them. But it got worse. He became a vocal abolitionist. And when he became Attorney General, he actually brought charges against slave owners for cruelty to their slaves. I have communication with him with Zachary Macaulay, who was the second most influential man in the Clapham sect, that group of Protestant reformers in England. Macaulay went on to be the founding Governor General of Sierra Leone, the colony set up for the free slaves. He is buried in Westminster Cathedral, and on his bust over his grave is this sign that they used for the abolitionist movement. It's a kneeling figure of a slave with the motto, "Am I not a man and a brother?" I also have references to communication with Sir William Wilberforce. I don't have any of that yet. Wilberforce was the leader of the Clapham sect, and he devoted his life to ending slavery in the British Empire. It took him over 40 years, and he did it by stages, first ending the slave trade, and eventually, when he was on his deathbed, he saw slavery abolished throughout the entire British Empire. Now, the question is, how did these books get from the Bahamas into the hands of the 8th President of the United States? And it gets difficult at this point, because this is the signature of the third owner. We're dealing plain vanilla in names here. William Jones. But thanks to Google imaging, we can compare signatures. And I was able to identify who I thought it was, and then get official signatures out of Washington, and confirm by some of the unusual things in his signature, like this strange E that he does in Jones, that it's this man, William Jones, who was the Secretary of Navy during the War of 1812. That's a portrait by Gilbert Stuart that hangs in the White House. Jones was the opposite side of the Revolutionary War. He fought at Trenton with Washington, at Princeton. He joined the Colonial Navy, was captured by the British, imprisoned on one of those horrid British prison ships, but by the grace of God, he was swapped for a British officer and was able to serve out the rest of the war in the Colonial Navy. at the conclusion of which he settled down in Charleston and started a shipping firm. Now, if you remember anything about history, your history classes, at that era, there was heavy trade with the Caribbean islands, lumber, molasses, slaves, and so it's understandable how he could have had access to this set in the Bahamas. Now, after the Revolution, he started this shipping firm, but he became involved in Jeffersonian republicanism. And he moved back to Philadelphia, his hometown, started a new shipping firm, and was elected to Congress. Jefferson had asked him to be his Secretary of the Navy, but he refused. And it wasn't until Madison asked him to do that during the War of 1812 that he finally became the Secretary of the Navy during the second half of that war. And this is so interesting. He took his own shipbuilders from his Philadelphia firm and built the ships that MacDonough used to defeat the British Navy at the Battle of Plattsburgh Bay, which stopped the last attempted invasion of the British into the United States during the War of 1812. We had this new historical plaque out in front of the Judicial Building that explains that all of the cross streets to Dexter Avenue are named for the naval heroes of the War of 1812. So we have Perry and McDonough, Hull, Decatur, Bainbridge, Lawrence. My office looks out on McDonough Street, named for the man who won the battle at Plattsburgh Bay with the ships built by Jones Shipbuilders. It's just amazing to be able to connect with history like this. Now, he went on to be the acting Secretary of the Treasury from 1813 to 1814, and then was President of the Second Bank of the United States. So, this historic set of books right before you that's taken us through, how do we get there? There we go. It's fascinating to me that we can go through this history of British West Florida, the Revolutionary War from two sides, and then end up into the hands of the 8th President of the United States. These books still exist because people treasure them. And it's not just because they're old. They had such a significant impact on the founding of America and the early formative years of America. That's why I study them. That's why I will quote them from time to time in some of our writings, so that we can really keep our origin in mind, rather than just looking at the opinions of men in the form of judges. Let's go back to these foundational principles. The whole war was about establishing the rule of law instead of the rule of man. And we don't need to turn this over again to the rule of man, through the rule of judges. And I say that as a judge, we need to maintain our founding dependence on the rule of law, going back to foundational legal principles. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this with you. And I don't know what kind of time we might have.
We can take some questions. Who's got a question?
Justice Parker, in your travels across Alabama in the campaign, what concerns do you find Alabamians have about the judicial system?
Matt, I regret to say that most Alabamians are not directly engaged with the judicial system. They don't understand its impact on their lives, or even on our state general fund. But when I talk to people within the system, the major concern right now is what it should be. It's the critical funding shortage for the judiciary. And let me say this, before my 14 years on the Supreme Court as a justice, I was deputy director of the Alabama court system. That's second in command. I was general counsel for all the trial court lawyers, like you mentioned in your introduction. Also was in charge of the Judicial College, providing training for all of the judges, circuit court clerks, and other court personnel. I had to manage our way through one of these periodic funding crises, and we have not recovered. There are clerk's offices out in rural areas that might only have one assistant. We have our own studies that show what the manpower need is, and we are woefully under that because we are woefully underfunded. Right now, there are $6 to $8 million in employee costs that are being paid by counties rather than the administrative office of courts, because the money hadn't been given by the legislature. The county should not be picking that up. That's the responsibility of the legislature through funding of our judicial system. And I am committed to fighting for that. I've seen the problems we've gone through. We need to put flesh back on those bones and get judges and clerks free to do the job that you elect them to do, instead of being weighted down by financial concerns or by funding, staff shortages. I mean, when we had judges with no security in their courtroom, that's a problem that couldn't wait to happen. And so we need to focus on that. That's my commitment. And because I lobbied in the legislature for the Alabama Policy Institute, I'm familiar with that process, comfortable with it, know many of the legislators. And we have an opportunity now to have a perfect party alignment from Chief Justice to Governor to majority in the legislature. All of our funding crises have occurred in the past when there was a misalignment of parties somewhere along those three branches of government. So I'm hoping that if I am elected on November 6th, that I'll be able to work with a Republican governor and a Republican majority in the legislature to rectify this problem, get our court system functioning again. Thank you.
Dave.
Judge, I am by no means an expert on Blackstone as you are, but I would submit to you that if Blackstone were to comment on the foundation of our democracy, he would probably say that a critical foundation is that our society adhere to the laws of the land and the rulings of the United States Supreme Court. As Chief Justice, are you prepared to continue to adhere to the rulings of the United States Supreme Court as it affects the state of Alabama?
Well, you jump with a premise there in your question that is out of the time sequence with Blackstone. There was no U.S. Supreme Court at that time, so he had nothing to say about that. I will say that I firmly honor the Constitution, and even when a liberal majority on the U.S. Supreme Court ignores the Constitution, we have conservative justices who have pointed out where there's no constitutional basis to their decisions. We need to see the Constitution respected and honored again, and the proper balance of government restored through that process.
I'm not sure, I hate to say this, but I'm not quite sure I understand. If the United States Supreme Court issues a ruling, as Chief Justice, are you prepared to support that ruling as it applies to the state of Alabama?
We have two parallel judicial systems in this country, the federal system and the state system. The federal judges are in hierarchy. They are bound to follow the precedent of the U.S. Supreme Court. My oath of office, as the oath of every judge and every public official, is to the U.S. Constitution, not to the U.S. Supreme Court. They aggravated that, they grabbed that authority for themselves in one of their decisions. And it's a struggle we've been having in this country ever since they exceeded that authority. I'm hoping that we'll see a proper restoration of our federal system again.
Down here.
Yeah, not a question, it's a comment. I've been a member of this club for 50 years, and that's one of the most interesting talks I've ever heard.
Well, and it's just astounding to me that I got this at auction only advertised as a first edition, and look at the history that we're able to experience firsthand going through this. And to think that it originated in Alabama and introduced this common law into a third of our state geographically. That's just too much to comprehend.
Other questions? Ed?
Just a quick question. I get concerned about people being focused on the composition of the Supreme Court. that we gotta have more conservatives, and can there be, and how can there be, two interpretations of constitutional law? And could you quickly point out the basics of each one of those?
Yes, I'll try to do that. And I began by saying that I'm an originalist. That means I try to discover and adhere to the original intent of the framers. The other school of judicial constitutional interpretation is called the living document approach. And that makes the Constitution something that changes with the changing of the times. And when you go to that extreme, it puts all power in the hands of men, of judges. They're the ones who determine what they want it to mean through their rulings. That, as our previous question alluded to, they would have everybody follow their interpretation for the modern era rather than the contract that we were given at the inception of this country. Now, as many attorneys in this room know, in contract law, we don't go out and reinterpret the contract. We try to determine what is meant by the words or what was the intent of those who drafted and signed the contract. That's the approach of originalists, and that's what I adhere to.
Okay, one more question.
I wanted to agree with the previous comment. This is one of the most interesting presentations I've seen. It seems to me that we need to have presentations like this in our own history. I don't think our children are being taught this. I don't think it's being taught in our universities. This foundational documentation where people understand this is not just arbitrary. Any thoughts on how to spread the word beyond the internet?
Well, I will say that I have spoken to the entire senior class across several counties gathered together for this type presentation. And I relish the opportunity to do this and would welcome any invitations I get to do it here in Jefferson County.
Great. Thank you, Justice. Yeah, Justice Parker, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for being with us today and sharing your views in this wonderful history lesson. Okay, upcoming programs. Excuse me. Very excited about upcoming programs. Next week, we're honored to have the governor. Governor Ivey will be here. Hope many of you will show up for that. The week after that, we have Secretary of Commerce Greg Canfield will give us an update on the state of commerce in the state of Alabama. There's lots of exciting things coming. And then, as a reminder, we've got Veterans Day on Monday, November 12th. We've been working with Ed Rao and the Military Affairs Committee, so we wanted to be sure we had a military-themed speaker. I mentioned the speaker we're going to have November 6th, retired Air Force Colonel Steve Conlon, who, again, Ed was kind enough to get for us, where he'll give us a behind-the-scenes look at special operations from the Air Force perspective. Steve is also a Silver Star and Distinguished Flying Cross recipient, so should be a great speaker then. And then November 7th, we'll have our first Connect Over Coffee. That's our small group gathering at Wednesday, November 7th at Revelator in Mount Brook Village. Drop in any time between 7 a.m. and 8:30. This is, again, something the new member engagement committee put together. Chance to meet some of the officers of Kiwanis and meet some other members of Kiwanis that you may not have met before. Particularly great for new members. And then, November 13th, as Jake Reese is fond of saying, great authors and Kiwanis go together like peas and carrots. Well, that's because we have author Winston Groom will be here on November 13th. So run, Forrest, run. We are adjourned. Thank you.